my top two winners of this NFL offseason are the Bears, for one. They beefed up both their offensive and defensive line through the offseason. They obviously got an upgrade at head coach, somebody who actually knows how to call timeouts, and could be like, are we crowning him an offensive genius, guru, whatever you want to call it? The lines were amazing last year, and I think bringing that play style into the Bears with Caleb Williams, beefing up their offensive line, getting a guy like Joe Tooney, getting Brady Jarrett, signing Drew Dahlman, two tight ends, which they didn't really need, but Robert Tonyan and Durham Smythe. I watched Durham Smythe as a Dolphin. He was a really good player. Robert Tonyan obviously had that year on the Packers. We played with Aaron Rodgers and had a really good season. Beefing up their offensive line, getting some guys on offense, getting some players on defense. I think the Bears, and an offseason class where it felt like a lot of guys stayed in the same place, or like a lot of teams kind of just either stayed stagnant or got a little bit worse. I think the Bears made steps in the right direction between their head coach and then like the offensive line and defensive line. I think that they made strides in the right direction. I like the Bears their offseason so far, and they haven't even gotten to the draft yet. So
yeah, I like the Bears and what they've done so far in the offseason as well. The winner that I had just off the top, the Minnesota Vikings. I like that they did not overpay for Sam Darnold. They decided that, hey, this is what good teams do. They don't end up investing in a guy who could potentially kill their salary cap after one good year of play. And this is what I've been preaching, where if a quarterback is not that needle mover, don't spend so much money on him. I get it. It's a quarterback driven league, but it's only those few quarterbacks that really, really at the top can make a difference for your team and are worth the amount of money being thrown around. Sam Darnold, in my opinion, was not that guy. So they held off and they said, we're just going to give the keys to JJ McCarthy. Now, I don't know if they're going to end up going to make a move to go get Aaron Rodgers. I mean, that would mess this whole thing up, I think, a little bit. But even if they got Aaron Rodgers, is still a very talented player, Hall of Famer. I mean, he's still pretty good. And if you give him the Vikings roster, I think that that's pretty good stability. They also added some guys on defense, Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave. They have some injury concerns, but I definitely think that that helps their defensive line. So overall, I think the way that they're going about this free agency is very good, and trying to ramp up to have another successful regular season, this time have more success in the postseason. I think they're doing well.
And at this point, if you mentioned Aaron Rodgers' point, I think that if you bring Aaron Rodgers in, he's not getting anywhere close to the amount of money that a lot of other starting quarterbacks are going to get, especially because he's still getting paid by the Jets. So it doesn't look as bad even if you do bring Aaron Rodgers in. Maybe JJ McCarthy needs another year. He's not fully recovered off his injury. You maybe want to sit another year. Even if they do get Aaron Rodgers, it's just the fact that they didn't have to overpay for a quarterback that might be like Sam Darnold is just probably towards like the middle of the field, maybe a little bit in the upper echelon of that middle of the field. I think that you hit the nail on the head. I don't think overpaying for Sam Darnold would have been a good thing for them. And there's just other options out there. And then JJ McCarthy, obviously you drafted him in the first round last year. You have at least some belief in him. So, and then if you want to move into my second winner. The Commanders, I think that they had a really good offseason as well. They retained guys like Bobby Wagner, Zach Ertz. I mean, both those guys were big for them last year. Obviously, Bobby Wagner's been in the league for, it feels like, forever now. And he's not the linebacker he once was, but he's still a defensive leader. And he still had a really good season last year. And Zach Ertz was clutch for them in the playoffs, and towards the end of the regular season, he's still decent, obviously coming over from the Eagles. Then you add guys like Deebo Samuel. Say whatever you want about Deebo Samuel being fat or whatever. Deebo Samuel's still a decent player, and they needed a second guy alongside Terry McLaurin. They didn't have one of those last year. Then you beef up the offensive line, and Laramie Tunsil, saying the word beef up a lot today, but they haven't. They're big guys. Laramie Tunsil is a big guy. He didn't have the greatest season last year. But I mean, he's, as a Dolphins fan, I watched him for years on end, and he was like one of the best offensive linemen that we've ever had in Dolphins history. So I think that Laramie Tunsil is a good trade. They didn't have to give up all that much for him. So the Commanders, in again, a free agency class where it didn't feel like all that many moves were made, I feel like they got better and they made the NFC Championship game last year.
So I was torn between two different teams, the Bills and the Bucks, and I think that they're on opposite ends of the spectrum for why I believe that they had a very good offseason or free agency so far this year. One, the Bucks had a big need, and they addressed it getting Hassan Reddick, 1 year, $14 million deal. They also wanted to retain a lot of their players, which they were able to do in Chris Godwin. I really felt like they didn't overpay and they didn't overstep, and they wanted to bring the team back and add where they needed to. I felt like they did that this offseason so far. And then the Bills. They had a major salary cap crisis, and they ended up cutting Von Miller, and then they replaced him essentially with Joey Bosa. And I thought that move was great. And I thought that they made a couple other moves here and there that also helped with their salary cap situation and helped, this team, or allow this team to potentially make a run at a Super Bowl again this year. I know every year we say that the Bills are Super Bowl contenders and they don't end up making it even to the Super Bowl, but I just felt like both those teams on opposite ends of the spectrum had different problems and they both were able to come out of it on top. I also believe that the Buffalo Bills have $10 million in cap space right now. They went they went on the complete other end of what they were doing, and they brought it all the way back down. So I thought they've had a good free agency period so far.
Any correlation to either of those teams for you, or just like general teams that you think are interesting?
Well, I was also going to say the Patriots, but I felt like they had I know you could calling it out a little bit, but I also feel like the Patriots had a really good offseason too, but they kind of paid big money to some B+ guys, and I felt like that wasn't really that's kind of the golden rule in the NFL free agency, is that you don't pay A+ money to B+ guys when they're asking for it.
Yeah.
And I felt like they did that at certain points, and they didn't have enough offensive line move.
Yeah, I mean, my personal biggest loser is on the opposite end of the Laramie Tunsil trade. I have the Texans as my biggest loser, just because of the fact that CJ Stroud got sacked the most times in the NFL. He had a little bit of, and that is partially to blame, his kind of sophomore slump that he had. He had good games in between, but everyone kind of called it a sophomore slump for him. Getting sacked so many times definitely does something to your confidence, and they didn't have. Laramie Tunsil didn't have the greatest year in the world, but he also was one of their shining stars on the offensive line, and just a name that you could kind of point out for them consistently. And trading away a guy like that, and then the moves that they did make, like Christian Kirk, sure. I mean, you already have 3 good wide receivers. Hopefully, Stephon Diggs can come back from injury, and I just don't know that Christian Kirk is a guy that really does anything for you. He'd maybe be your wide receiver 3 at best on that team, and then you lose another guy on the offensive line. I think they really need to retool the offensive line if they want to see any success in the AFC, and they're doing the opposite of that. So I mean, the Texans are my biggest loser this offseason.
God, I hope they figure out that offensive line, really, for CJ Stroud's sake. Okay, I chose the Cincinnati Bengals. I think this one's an obvious one. It's what everybody's been talking about. This team is essentially have no cap room, and the guys that they maybe would want to sign and figure something out don't really want to come back. Trey Hendrickson is now going to seek a trade, and T. Higgins franchise tag, he might hold out. Jamar Chase hasn't been taken care of yet, and Joe Burrow is getting paid a massive amount of money. He's worth it, but still, at the end of the day, that hurts teams and trying to team build around them. The Bengals also just have a general reputation of being cheap, not being the greatest organization, and they're not beating the allegations just yet in this offseason. I felt like they haven't really made a step to get all that better. And it's like the Bills were able to figure it out. Other teams who have salary cap issues, maybe even like the New Orleans Saints, also end up figuring things out. You've got to be able to do that because you got Joe Burrow. You can't be wasting years. And I feel like, unfortunately, this free agency period looks like it could potentially waste another year of his career in his prime when he's already had an injury history. Cincinnati Bengals, definitely, in my opinion, by far, at least the worst team situation right now in the NFL.
Yeah, and then you lose a guy like Sam Hubbard who retires in the offseason, even another detriment to your defense at this point. And a guy that you guys drafted, kept him his whole career since 2018. He retires, it feels like a little bit surprisingly, but now that's another hole that you need to fill. And just in an offseason where it feels like they either got worse and didn't make any strides to get better. The Cincinnati Bengals, what can you really say about them? I completely agree.